Earlier this year, we learned that more than 1 out of 3 calls to the VA crisis hotline were going unanswered. Imagine a veteran calling for help and then getting sent to voicemail. There's no excuse for that. This bill, authored by our colleague David Young, requires that the VA makes improvements so that veterans actually get a time to be grateful for all In addition, the House today will pass a measure making it easier to stop midnight regulations. There is a tradition of bipartisan opposition to regulations imposed at the end of an outgoing administration. We've seen just how the impact of just one rule in livelihoods. So the last thing that we need to the new unified Republican government. Lastly, this morning, House Republicans met with Vice President-elect Mike Pence. Sounds good. Just saying that. He gave our members an update on the transition and the priorities for this new administration. It was a warm and very productive conversation. One thing that his visit here emphasizes that if we are committed to having a truly unified Republican government, not just in name, but we are committed to doing it in practice. So working hand in glove from the start, during this transition, if we're going to go big, we have got to hit the ground running. The American people voted for change, and we are ready to get to work. I'll be meeting with the Vice President later today to further discuss more things for the transition. Questions?
Speaker Lyon?
Yeah.
Based on your understanding of nepotism rules, do you believe that Jared Kushner should be able to take a job at the White House?
I have really no comment about what job he should or should not take, but look, he was a very integral part of the campaign. He's obviously a brilliant young man who Donald Trump trusts. So I'll leave it up to the Trump transition team as to decide what role he plays. But you have to understand this he played a very important role in this campaign, and I think that should be respected.
I'm just asking what your understanding of the nepotism rules is.
I don't have a deep understanding of how they work.
Mr. Speaker, I know that there's a lot that you guys are trying to consider now as you work with the administration, the incoming administration, to figure out a timeline, a track, health care, immigration, and keeping the government open, the debt ceiling, and so on and so forth. But are you concerned, though, that there's going to be these two countervailing forces where the public is going to say, wait a minute, why haven't you passed all this stuff in January? And you want to do it right, so it's also going to take some time to get those plans together, regardless of the groundwork you can lay now or even in early January. How do you balance those two things? And some of your members in your conference are going to demand that, and maybe even the president, because he's new at this too, might demand it.
Look, that's what we're doing with the transition team right now. We're going to have plenty of time to talk about the legislative schedule, the legislative calendar. Congress is a bicameral legislature. We move fairly quickly here in the House, but the Senate is kind of another story. They don't move as quickly as the House does. But we will deliver on this agenda. And yes, of course, that takes time because that is how the legislature works. And I think we'll be making sure that people understand just how the calendar works, just how the progress of legislation works, because we intend on delivering. And we're going to make sure that this is the most productive Congress we've seen in a long, long time. And I'm confident that as people understand the way the legislative process works, they will see that we're going to be hitting the ground running, and we're going to be moving to fix these problems for the American people as they have given us this unified government in trust to do.
Just following up on that, when you say hit the ground running, what are the specific legislation that you're going to be pushing in the first 100 days?
We'll have plenty of time to talk about that later. We are just in the beginning of the transition period. So we are just now working with the incoming administration on planning that transition. So it's a little premature to get into what day, what bill is coming up for vote, other than to say that's the kind of conversations we're having right now, making sure that we plan not just here in the House, but with our friends over in the Senate and with the new incoming administration that is just a couple weeks into this transition. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about all that stuff.
But you talked about, you both sides, the president-elect and you all have talked about tax cuts, talked about repealing and replacing Obamacare, those things. So
yeah. All those things we'll have plenty of time to talk about later on as to when they come up. This is what our transition is about. None of these decisions have been made yet. We're just in the beginning of this. So when we have made decisions about the timing of legislation, you'll be the first to know.
Speaker, following Mr. Speaker, one of the things that
don't blurt out. Man.
One of the things that Donald Trump has talked about is the so-called drain the swamp agenda. One of those things is to impose term limits on members of Congress. What is your view on term limits?
I've always supported term limits. I've long been a fan of term limits, actually. I don't know where all the other members stand, but that's something I've always
Will
been
you
in
push
favor
for
of.
legislation on that?
I'll leave it up to others to decide that. Judiciary Committee, I've actually been in favor of term limits ever since I've been here, before I came here. Christina?
What is the advantage of just doing a CR through March? Why is the Trump team asking you guys to do that instead of funding the government through next September?
Well, I think the new incoming government would like to have a say-so on how spending is to be allocated in 2017. And so we are working with the new incoming government, the new Trump administration, on the timing of that, on the continuing resolution. And so I think they would like to have a say-so on how money is going to be spent going into the rest of this fiscal year.
But for any particular purpose, do they want more defense spending? Like, have they?
That I can't answer that. What they have asked us is to work with them on the continuing resolution as we described. We're going to do just that because I think we've got a lot of priorities that we would like to see changed relative to the Obama funding priorities. It's just that simple.
Mr. Speaker. How would your desire, as you spoke of off the top, for a unified Republican government and the desire to go big be helped by a possible return of earmarks?
Well, here's what our members are concerned about. Our members are worried that we have seen a dilution of the separation of powers. Our members are worried that the executive branch, unelected bureaucrats, have been given far too much power, and that we've seen violence done to the separation of powers. So restoring the power of the purse truly to the legislative branch so that elected officials can hold the unelected branch of government more accountable is what is the genesis of that concern. We decided yesterday that we're going to spend a good amount of time deliberating how best to do that. So we're going to be spending the first quarter of 2017 figuring out just how we can make sure we can restore the power of the purse to the legislative branch to hold the unelected branch of government accountable.
So there's likely to have a return in some form.
We're going to have a debate about how to do our job as holding the executive branch oversight. Here's the concern. The one that many members talk about is the Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers is run by unelected people that do not necessarily reflect the will and the sentiment of the elected branch of government. So we want to make sure that in this opportunity we have with unified Republican government, we're restoring the Constitution, we're restoring the separation of powers, we're restoring accountability to the federal government. When we say drain the swamp, that means stop giving all this power to unelected people to micromanage our society, our economy, and our lives, and restore the Constitution. And that's what this debate is about.
Mr. Speaker.
How about that?
Mr. Speaker, can you sort of just lay out your big picture thinking on the fiscal implications of the Trump House Republican agenda? How do you secure the border, increase defense spending, increase infrastructure spending, and do tax reform in a fiscally responsible manner without increasing the debt and deficit?
Well, a couple of things. You need to hold down spending in the critical areas where it's growing so fast, and you need to grow the economy. Let's not forget that we have been in a slow growth economy for far, far too long. We're just limping along, I would argue, not even close to our potential. So what we want to do coming out of the gates is get this economy growing. Releasing the regulatory chokehold that is on the U.S. economy is one of the first things we can do to help get this economy growing. Comprehensive tax reform is one of the things we can do to get this economy growing. Faster economic growth means more GDP, more wages, more jobs, more revenue. But we also have to deal with the drivers of our debt. Don't forget that Obamacare rewrote three entitlement programs, the three entitlement programs that are the primary drivers of our debt. So when we replace Obamacare, a law that is collapsing under its own weight, this is a law where people are getting hit consistently year after year with double-digit premium increases. This is a law that is rising the deductibles so high that families don't even feel like they have health insurance because their deductibles are so high. This is a law where, according to Kaiser, if I'm not mistaken, 31% of the counties in America have one choice of a plan. That's not a choice, that's a monopoly. So this law is failing, it is not working. Oh, don't forget the fact that this law, it rewrote Medicaid and Medicare. This law has done great damage to Medicare, the IPAB, I can go on and on. So we've got to replace this law with one that works for the American people, with one that gives people more choices, that has more competition, that has a patient-centered system so that we can lower prices and get better healthcare value for our dollar. You do that, you fix the healthcare problem, you are dramatically fixing the fiscal health of this country. So those are among the things that we have to do if we're going to truly nurse ourselves back to fiscal health and better management, economic growth, and fix and replace this broken Obamacare law.
Would you look at premium support for Medicare or block granting Medicaid as part of?
We'll get into all this stuff down the road when we're doing our replacement plan.
It took 3 years to get from the passage of the Affordable Care Act to the implementation of the exchanges. How early can these people who are seeing these huge premium spikes expect through executive or legislative action?
It's a great question. That's one that we're going to be dealing with all year long. It's too early to have to know the answer to how fast can Obamacare relief occur. What we're focused on is how we get Obamacare repealed and what we replace it with so that we can get that relief to the American families as fast as possible. That's something we're going to be discussing all along. That's one of the big topics of our transition.
Last question.
You want more? Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. President-elect Trump promised to, quote, defund Planned Parenthood as long as they continue to perform abortions. Will the Republican House pass legislation that prohibits any federal funds from going to any Planned Parenthood affiliate until Planned Parenthood stops doing abortions?
We've already shown what we believe with respect to funding Planned Parenthood. We put a bill on President Obama's desk in reconciliation. Our position has not changed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.